Welcome everybody to our first monthly drop-in. We'll be joined by my colleague Phil Peters today in just a moment, and he'll take us through the rest of the content in due course. Just to say that this session is being recorded and will be distributed within our community platform, which is a closed community. So if you want to rewatch this video, you can get in there and get access to the session today. In terms of our agenda for today, I will take us through just a little intro to Shuttle and what we do. And then in particular, the merchant setup component, which is the thing that we're going to talk about today. And then I'll hand over to Phil and he'll talk about the benefits of the component, show you a bit of the product, talk through some of the features, what's new in this component to compared to the previous version. And then we'll let you guys who are on this call ask any questions that you want to ask. At that point, I will unmute you and allow you to share your video as well. Let's just get straight into this. So we built Shuttle to specifically solve the challenges that software platforms face when needing to connect multiple payment services. And we wanted to make it easy for product teams to build stuff so they don't have to keep building or maintaining much code or much product in relation to payments, which means ultimately they can focus on building out their own roadmap. They don't have to be payments experts, and their customers can serve themselves through the components and features that we enable them to reuse. And so today's topic is about a key component within Shuttle, something that we call the merchant setup and onboarding UX. And it's how a merchant can actually go and connect their payment gateway or their payment service. So let me introduce Phil from our team, and he's going to take us through the rest of the agenda.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Nick. Hey guys, I just wanted to take you through what we're basically doing with the merchant view. We've made a couple of improvements recently, which we're launching in January 2023. And so I'll just talk through those as well. And I'll just go through some of the key features of it, perhaps in a bit more detail than you've been through in the past. If there's anything that you pick up that you're interested to know more about, then we can obviously talk about that either in the Q&A at the end or post the session. So I look after products in Shuttle, and there's three key things which are guiding the decisions we make when designing the product. The first one is, what can we build so you don't have to build? And what should we and what shouldn't we? So essentially what I want to be able to do is I want you to be up and running as quickly as possible, but equally I want everything that we build to feel like it belongs within your app. I want your users to feel like they're still within your platform. The second one is about actually how to deliver confidence to payment processing. And so a lot of that comes down to consistency. We're working with a lot of payment providers that work different ways, provide different experiences. But as a platform owner like you guys, what we need to do is we need to make sure that our customers have consistent experiences, whether or not they're using Stripe or if they're using Adyen, checkout.com, etc., or if they're doing a card payment versus an ACH payment versus a separate payment. So how can we deliver consistency and also just robustness in terms of actually whatever the payment method is, ultimately we'll pick up all the edge cases and try to fail over and deliver a consistent experience. And then the last one is, how do we make the whole thing self-service? So ultimately what we want to do is we want you to be fully empowered, and we want ultimately your end merchant to be fully empowered so that you don't get support tickets and we don't get support tickets. Obviously, we're always here as a second line for support for you guys. We work hard to basically every support ticket we get is like, how could we eliminate the support ticket? How can we do better at providing you the tools and the end merchant the tools to be able to self-service? So the key benefits of the onboarding tool is really interesting. It's the first time a merchant essentially enables payments within your platform. So what will happen is a merchant setting up your platform, whatever it might be, an e-commerce store, and they get to a step where they want to enable payments. And in this step, what they need to be able to do is connect to a payment provider and then configure any kind of payment options that need to be configured. And so our onboarding tool is a widget that actually you can drop into your product, and you can basically, it does everything for you in terms of it allowing the merchant to select a payment provider, but then also allowing them to configure that checkout experience. And so the key benefits of the onboarding tool is it's really easy to connect payment providers and for different fraud tools, which is something new, what we're talking about in a moment. You actually don't need to build anything from a UX perspective. So what we've done is you drop in our component, we'll manage the whole UX process for you. We allow the merchant, it's designed for the merchant to actually do this. So a lot of payment providers are increasingly using like OAuth, which actually means you need to have credentials to the payment provider, which means you can no longer get away with asking your merchant to share their credentials with you. So we actually need to have a tool that the merchant can go through the onboarding. The UX is configurable and customizable. So you can actually style the onboarding tool to fit within your user experience. And last one is the setup is dynamically reflected in checkout. So whatever you configure at setup, you might be connecting a card processor, PayPal, or a combination thereof. That will just dynamically work at checkout. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull up a demo and just talk through some of the actual different features of that demo. Just excuse me as I look down, which is where my screen is that I'll be sharing. Are you able to see my screen? Super. Okay, great. So what it's got here is an example of the onboarding tool in this section. It's about to display at the top of this page. Now, let me just load that. Okay, great. Now, what you'll see in this tool is designed to be iframed in. And so essentially around about from just the top left of the service providers down to wherever the end of the div is actually an iframe that you can actually drop into your site. And what you'll see is all the different texts, the colors can all be styled, fonts, the spacing can be styled through CSS variables that you pass to us to make it feel like it belongs within your site. So we're very intentionally being really unopinionated via the UX to try to make it really fit within whatever style site you actually have. And what the merchant can do is they can connect their service providers. So in this example, I've connected Stripe and PayPal. And then they can decide what they actually want to have on their checkout. So with my Stripe account, I've got cards and I've got SEPA. And on my PayPal account, I've actually got cards and PayPal enabled. And so this is said, because that's the configuration I've connected by my service providers, I can actually decide, do I want to enable cards? And if so, do I want it to go via my Stripe account or my PayPal account? Do I want to enable PayPal? Do I want to enable SEPA? And what we actually do is you can actually now preview the checkout, what the checkout will look like from an end merchant. If you just give this a moment, it will just compile dynamically the checkout. So this is what a checkout, if you used our inline style and you didn't pass through any of your branding or anything like that, just by off the shelf would look like our experience. That would dynamically adjust to the width, which is obviously cards and PayPal. However, let's say because I've got SEPA, which is a European technology, I'd say, oh, what does that look like for a Euro transaction? And what you'll see is it compile up and actually provide SEPA as an option. So you'll see we'll provide the two options, card and SEPA, with PayPal as a default option. Now that becomes quite interesting as you actually turn on and off different choices. So within Stripe and PayPal, they've got various different configurations and that allows you to dynamically see what's going on. That's a very quick introduction. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through the process from your merchant. If you use the onboarding tool, what do they experience? And what does that actually mean? So this section in the gray, I'm going to talk about in a minute. That's just the integration code that we did to put the onboarding tool on the screen. Right. So do you imagine that you're in your software platform and you've decided to enable payments? You've dropped in the widget and said, hey, this is my customer. This is, let's say it's an e-commerce site. This is store 500. And you'll say, I want to use the onboarding tool for store 500. The first thing we'll do is we'll recognize that we don't know anything about store 500 and we'll ask them to onboard onto one or more service providers. Depending on the country that they're in, we'll provide a contextual list of those service providers, and then they'll be able to connect their service providers through a choice of, some of them will require credentials, like checkout.com, where we actually ask for things like API keys, and then some of them will use OAuth, where we actually do things like ask them to log in. So if they connect to Stripe, we'll go through a Stripe login process, and then we'll land back on this site. But the key thing for you is that actually, as we add more and more payment processes in here, you don't actually have to write any extra code. The only code that you wrote was, I want to drop this iframe into your site. We've got something called Sandbox in our test environment, which is a test payment gateway that we provide to allow you to do your integration testing. And I'm going to say this payment gateway has, let's say, ACH and SEPA enabled. If you do use our Sandbox gateway for your development and testing, we provide you a whole lot of extra options as well to emulate some of the different scenarios that different processors have. And there's a whole series of things there that you can do to really facilitate and speed up your integration. So I'm going to save that. And then what I'll have, so that's established a connection to our Sandbox gateway. It's confirmed, it's connected, the credentials are working. Were their credentials? And if you remember, these are the options I enabled. And it just says they're all going via Sandbox. If you remember my previous example, I'd connect to multiple different gateways, and then I could choose which gateway I'd connect to. And so then they've literally done. They're ready. At that point, when they connected Sandbox, we've sent you two different notifications, a webhook and also a JavaScript notification saying that this merchant is now ready to accept payment. Now, the merchant can continue going, adding more payment gateways and customizing that checkout if they wish, or they could just get going. If you look at the preview checkout, just like we did on the previous example, this merchant will be able to, for the first time, it takes a segment file, you'll be able to see actually this is what's enabled. Or if I went into Sandbox, for example, and I wanted to enable address verification, that would then reflect on that checkout. Just give me a moment to compile. And then you can actually see what that experience would be, which is really handy if you've got, a number of different providers. You're not always sure. Some providers work with e-commerce, but they don't work with motor and whatnot, and it gives you confidence without actually having to go through the whole site and actually test everything to see what the customer's going to experience at checkout. Now, in terms of the integration is really simple. So what you need to do is, assuming you're familiar with a REST API call, you just have to send us the configuration of how you would like this to behave, which this is the example that this page uses. And then we return you a unique identifier. And all you have to do is put a div on your web page that has that unique identifier in it. And then our Shuttle JavaScript library that we provide you will automatically pick that up and inject our user experience in that form. Great. So what I want to do is just run through some features now. So the key features of this product is it's designed to be an iframe that you can drop into your existing application. It's designed to be mobile first. The whole thing works just as well on mobile as it does on web. You can actually style it up and pass through in this context field. You can pass through a attribute called theme, which if you see our API docs, you can then define there's about 50 different CSS variables that you can override and customize to make this behave. The ones that I see most often used are generally around fonts and the colors of this primary color to adjust it to be the primary color of your site. And then sometimes if there's a little bit of spacing, just so we inject our iframe, just the spacing around the iframe and the padding just lines up and makes it feel like it naturally fits within your site. We now have over 25 payment processors. We've got a whole lot of extra ones which are private, which basically, one of the things I talked about was having confidence in our integrations, and some of the payment providers that we integrate into, if they don't actually meet certain SLAs in terms of being able to like uptime and being able to respond to support queries, we actually delist them from a primary one and we just make them available on request. So there's actually, we've got about another 20, which are, we have integrations for, but actually they're just, you don't want to be offering them as a stock standard option unless someone actually specifically requests them. After this initial integration, like once you've actually designed this code where you basically post us the options and then inject this line of code, there's not more code to write. Like in terms of each month or year, like you don't actually have to do changes. We'll modify, we'll improve, build extra features into the onboarding component, but there won't be extra code for you to write. You can connect more payment processors like I showcased earlier to composer checkout. Realistically, that's quite interesting for ones like Stripe and PayPal. Well, that's the example I'll go into in a minute. For example, because Stripe doesn't offer PayPal, and PayPal is obviously a really obvious choice you want to offer in checkout. Or if you want to offer buy now, pay later options or whatnot, you can easily string that up. You can dynamically enable and disable payment options. You can combine this with a fraud tool now, which is a brand new feature that we're launching in January. Some of our customers, particularly from high fraud risk industries, basically really want to be able to utilize a third-party customized fraud tool. And so we're launching initially with a partner called Count, who are one of the leading fraud tools out there. And what we allow you to do is if you've installed a service provider that offers a fraud service, the actual fraud option will appear under each payment method. And then you can decide which payment methods I want to go through my fraud tool and apply additional portals to. Other key features, you can control all your settings in one place. Like sometimes we see with other integrations, like if you're building if you've got an app store environment where you've actually got a Stripe integration and an authorized.net integration, a checkout integration, they can become inconsistent, and then there's lots of different places to go and modify things. So it's really easy here. You modify the configuration under the service provider list when you can customize checkout here. You can preview checkout as I've showed you, and you can see what it looks like in both Moto and e-commerce. So Moto is like a telephone payment where a staff member's entering the payment. The key thing about that is obviously a customer shouldn't be sharing your credentials like PayPal with a staff member. So things like PayPal, things like 3D Secure don't exist in a Moto process or a telephone order process. We allow you to handle migrations from one gateway to another. So for example, if I'm using authorized.net and I've decided to switch from authorized.net to Adyen, what I can do is I can actually add Adyen as a service provider. And then I can just toggle who I want to process cards via to start using Adyen. And so if I did that, any saved cards under authorized.net would remain there. And anyone that tried to pay on a saved card would be able to do so unless I actually went into authorized.net and chose to disconnect authorized.net. If I leave authorized.net there and connected, saved cards will continue to be presented and continue to function. So what you'll find that typically what will happen is you'll onboard onto Adyen, you'll drive all new traffic into Adyen, and then you'll wait for basically all the stored cards to basically run down on authorized.net. And once they've actually run down, then you can switch that off and stop having to account keep, which is a real key feature. We have very extensive auditing in Shuttle, and that's something I hope you've seen in our activity view, being able to see a full audit trail of everything that happens. And with our onboarding tool, there's a few parameters here which you can pass through the user that's currently logged in. So as you're managing login on your system, you just need to tell us the ID of the user that's logged in and the name. And what we'll do is we'll actually track the activity that happens in this onboarding tool against that user. If you reuse the same ID, it'll all be linked together. For example, if you're logged in via, I don't know, say Google, and you have their Google identifier, use that as their op key, which is their primary key. And then their name will override the name. So if I was Jamie Smith and then I got married to Jane Doe, my ID won't change, but my name will change. So we just want to make sure that we can actually string everything together, which is why we ask for the user ID and username. We do support multiple different permission levels in the checkout component. So there's an admin role and a read-only role. You can actually load it up in one of those two roles. We provide JavaScript events and webhook of things that happen. So the primary ones you'll get gateway updated webhooks and notifications, which basically every single time a gateway changes. You'll get some configuration chain webhooks called legal entity root webhooks. And will send you a webhook if the status of the payment changes. So if a merchant is able to take payments or not able to take payments, we'll let you know, so you can actually toggle on and off whether or not they're basically ready to check out. So for example, if they disconnected Stripe from PayPal, they're not configured to take payments. So you definitely want to be able to present as a call to action. And then the last thing I wanted to talk through in terms of feature is from the terms and conditions perspective, the merchant needs to agree to Shuttle's terms and conditions to use this tool. And we provide you two different ways of doing that. The first way is you can reflect our terms and conditions in your terms and conditions, and then everything just works seamlessly. But if you don't want to involve your legal department, what we'll do is actually when they onboard for the first time, we'll just ask them to agree to our terms and conditions in this merchant view. And I'll just bring an example. So this is just literally just to get you going quickly. Basically, they have to agree to these terms and conditions to be able to use the onboarding tool, which means that you can get up and running without having to worry with any of the legals. You can get rid of this page. As soon as you press agree, it just goes into the normal onboarding flow, and you can turn this off in our admin tool. So that's a lot of information. I just want to really quickly break it down to what was new in this January 2023 release. So the key ones are we're adding in support for fraud tools. So you can actually run your transactions through extra layers of fraud detection and prevention. We've added in the checkout preview, which really simplifies actually when you actually configure your gateway and you want to look at checkout, you don't have to go through an entire workflow of your product to see checkout. There's one additional feature actually that I hadn't mentioned, which is we now support private integration, where if you decide to not list all payment providers available to your merchants, so for example, you didn't want to offer Adyen to your merchants, but you had a client that really wanted to have Adyen, you can disable that now onboarding on our configurations. And then you can enable that just for an individual merchant. We provide a single process flow now as well. So if you've actually got a library of integrations, so let's imagine you've got a Stripe, Braintree, CyberSource integration, and you're adding Shuttle, you can now actually use our onboarding tool just in the mode of an individual processor. So you say, actually, I want to have in my app store, I want to checkout app, which actually uses Shuttle. And then you can just pass in this is for checkout. And then this will actually strip back down to just be checkout.com, which allows you to actually, if you need to side by side legacy integrations and new integrations, it now provides you a path forward for how to do that. And there's many little changes we've made since, particularly around adding simplifying some of the workflows in terms of the UX and also adding a couple of extra CSS for things around, for example, if I'm showing a modal pop up, how can you sync that so your application then grays out and has a gray out at the same level of gray and whatnot. So there's a whole lot of extra little use cases where they're now stitched up. So that's there. It's going to be launched at the beginning of January. As soon as we come out of our change freeze, probably in the first week of January. There's no code to actually start using this. It'll become automatically available once it gets released. The upgrade path, it's very from existing users of our onboarding tool, it feels almost exactly the same with some extra features. So there shouldn't be a need to be any retraining required. It will just automatically come in and then provide you some extra options. So that's it. Thanks for your time. I'll be accepting any questions you might have, or we can pick them up after this call. In terms of what's next, we're now working on some facilities on this onboarding tool about actually how we better connect it up with our payments marketplace to really provide a better service to merchants about ensuring they've got the right payment services enabled for their business, and also drawing out insights about how can they increase their conversion rates and increase their checkout KPIs. So that's where we're going over the course of the next 6 months as well. Nick, I'll hand back to you.
Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next time.